Our next story is by Jerry Sperber. As you already know, Jerry is married to Barbara, and I realized as I was writing introductions today, you guys are our first husband and wife speak up team ever. Jerry is a retired engineer who did software quality assurance, and then he switched careers and became a math teacher and is now retired from that. And now that he is twice retired, he enjoys photography, woodwork. He says, he told me design is the challenge with woodwork, which I thought was really spoken like an engineer. You don't remember saying that? You emailed it to me. He likes walking, cooking, and most importantly, being with his grandchildren. Jerry says he would win a Lifetime Achievement Oscar for getting this far in life without seriously injuring himself. Well done. Please welcome Jerry Sperber. Oh, that's good. Good? Okay.
Well, you tell me.
Looks good to me. All right.
Okay. It's a spring day in my junior year of high school. I'm getting on the train to come home. I get on at Hoyt-Schermerhorn in Brooklyn, and I'm going to ride the A train for about an hour all the way to 207th Street in Manhattan, the inward section of Manhattan, the last stop of the A train. I find a seat, take out my books, and I do my homework. I try to get everything done as much as possible so that when I get home, I can spend time with my family and be with my dad before he goes to work. At about 181st Street, my internal clock goes off and says, you know, it's time to put away the books. So I pack up, I'm sitting down and I realize, yeah, 3 more stations, yeah, it's great. I look up and I see these guys staring at me. I look at them, and I don't like the way they're looking at me. They're laughing, they're jostling each other. Something is not right. I recognize them. They're thugs, hoodlums from my neighborhood. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood. Not very rough, but a rough neighborhood, very anti-Semitic. It's not uncommon for people to call me Christ killer. Not uncommon for them to call me kike. Not uncommon for them to call me Jew boy. It was also not uncommon to get into fights for no other reason than being Jewish. I don't know why I'm feeling the way I do about these thugs. I think it might be because of my experiences in my neighborhood. Or it might be some embedded memories from what I hear my parents talking. My parents did not talk about the Holocaust. They immigrated and survived from Vienna. So they never talked. To them, the past is the past. We live for the present and the future. But being kids, you tend to overhear them talk to each other. You tend to hear them talk with other relatives, especially when they're talking about how to find out who else survived. My parents married in Vienna a couple of days after Christmas in 1935. They had a good life. My mother was an only child, came from a comfortable family, and was very close to her parents and her extended family. My father was the middle son of 3 boys. He was a successful businessman, owned his own furniture store in Vienna. They had what you would call a good life. That is, until March 12th, 1938. When the Nazis entered Vienna, life changed. Everything was turned upside down. Jewish businesses and storefronts had big Jewish stars painted over them, had Juden written all over the windows. People were afraid to go shopping, to go into stores. My father's his business virtually went out of business. People were afraid to enter Jewish establishments. Jews were required to wear the yellow Juden star. Humanity was a word that did not exist anymore. Things were terrible. When the Nazis marched down the streets in the various promenades, everyone was required to stop and salute. Sieg Heil! It was devastating. My mother and my grandmother hated the idea of saluting the Nazis. My grandmother feigned fainting, fell to the ground. My mother caught her, pretended to be waving her handkerchief to give her air. Anything to not salute the Nazis. With time, things did not get better. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. All storefronts in Vienna were smashed. There was utter chaos, destruction wherever they went. My parents and grandparents from their upper floor apartments were looking out. No one wanted to go out into the streets. Those in the streets wanted to get away. Shortly after Kristallnacht, my parents decided that in order for them to live, they have to leave now. My parents, my uncle, aunt, and cousin decided to leave Vienna. They left possessions and property. They had to go. In fact, their decision to leave was so sudden, my mother and father could not come together. My mother went by boat with my uncle's family, but my father couldn't get on that boat, so he had to go to Cuba. He spent a little over a year in Cuba in order to wait for the proper quota, to be properly vetted, and to get his visa to enter the United States. While in Cuba, in Havana, he happened to be at the Havana harbor when a ship in May of 1939, when a ship from Europe carrying Jewish refugees trying to escape the atrocities of the Nazi regime docked in Havana harbor, and the Cuban government refused to let any of the passengers get off the ship. The ship had to leave the harbor, eventually went back to Europe, and nearly all the passengers perished in the Holocaust. After a time, my father and mother reunited in New York. They managed to find an apartment in our current neighborhood and decided perhaps to start a family. Life at that time in the city was not very welcoming to Jewish immigrants. They were accused of being the cause of the war. They were accused of being the reason ration books were required in order to get food. I'm thinking about all this as I get up from my seat in the subway and walk to the last car of the train. Exiting from the last car of the train and walking the 5 blocks home is the best way for me to get home. I get to the last car, I sit down, I look up. These thugs, these hoodlums, have entered the car. Now I know there's a problem. What is going to happen next? Thank you.
Well, like Dana, I think at the end of the show, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to want to know what happened next. Good job, Jerry. And I'm so glad you told that story because it's a really important reminder that just because the war ended, the anti-Semitism and the hate didn't end. And here in the US as well.